What's up, world? I am Kevin Siskar, and you are listening to Ambition Today.
These are the entrepreneurs, creators, investors, and builders who ambitiously change the world. Explore the hardships and heroisms of everyday life while we reveal the key moments to leave behind a lasting legacy. This is Ambition Today with Kevin Siskar.
Welcome back to the second news roundtable. We had a great discussion 2 weeks ago with Tim Shisler. We have him back here today. Tim, welcome back to the pod.
Glad to be back. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
So today, the format for these shows are a little different than our previous ones where we interview guests. And in our last episode, we had a great interview with Jeff Wald. We had him back on the podcast 5 years later. He just sold WorkMarket, his company, to ADP. And so I highly recommend going and checking that out. We had a really interesting conversation about the future of work and the end of jobs, which is his new book. And so that's a good segue into the topics that we're going to talk about today. And in these news roundtable formats, Tim and I are each going to bring a topic to the table, and we're going to discuss kind of the future of what's happening in that space. And so, Tim, what are you bringing to the table today?
So I am bringing the kind of similar to what Jeff talked about, was more of the work from home aspect of how it's kind of taken over the workosphere and how that affects both employees and employers.
All right, awesome. And I want to talk about the future of American cities, big and small. You know, having grown up in Buffalo, living in New York, what I think is going to happen, and what I've sort of seen happen in New York, who got hit the hardest by the pandemic. And so, maybe we'll start there, because I think that'll lay a nice foundation for your topic of what's going to happen, what that means for remote work.
Let's do it.
All right, awesome. So, where do we begin with this? So, obviously, the pandemic, COVID-19, hit New York City harder than most. But that's not actually where I want to start with this. I want to start back in 2010. And so, New York is one of the greatest cities on the planet. It's always growing. And, I spent the last decade there. And basically what I saw was just nonstop growth. Okay. When we moved to New York, our rent was $1,800, and that apartment was like 350 square feet. And by the time we left that apartment, a few years later, they wanted $3,000 a month for it. And so, at the same time, we would walk down 3rd Avenue in the Upper East Side, and most of the storefronts would be vacant. And why was that? It was because all these landlords started increasing their commercial rents by $10,000 to $15,000 a month. So you used to have maybe a bodega owner or a restaurant or a cafe, and something owned locally by a local person who maybe lived in the building upstairs, right? And these landlords started saying, "Oh no, we're going to increase the rent to $25,000, $45,000 a month." At which point, the only one who could afford it is a Dwayne Reed or a Walgreens or a Sephora or really a big brand name. And so we moved to Brooklyn about 2 years ago, and one of the reasons is just like we kind of just saw Manhattan get hollowed out by the commercialness of it all, and really the nonstop growth in demand for the city. And so New York City was on a tear for the last 10 years is something that we have to understand going into this. And I think that tear became a bubble. And I think COVID-19 popped the bubble. And so I think a few things about that is it's going to be good for the city in the long run. I think a lot of those storefronts that were taken up by big chains are now going to open up for mom and pop people to open their own shop. I was talking with my barber in August, and him and his friends are looking to open a place, and they've been talking about it for years. And now they might finally be able to afford to do that in the heart of Soho. So I have more to say, but I'll stop there. Tim is someone who, I think you can give your own background, right? But you just moved to a big city as well. And we're kind of going in opposite directions here. I'm in the midst of leaving New York City, and you're in the midst of arriving somewhere else. What are you seeing? What do you think is happening here?
I thought that was an interesting perspective for this topic, is we've kind of had reverse courses. So I've been in Buffalo my whole life. You grew up in Buffalo, moved to New York 10, 15 years ago, have been in a big city. I see it in a more smaller, middle-sized American city. And then literally within a month of each other, we switched. You went from New York to Boston, or excuse me, New York to Buffalo. I went from Buffalo to Boston, kind of moving into that bigger city. So kind of seeing that resurgence of Buffalo over the past 10 years, it was, is and was a slow growth. And then moving to Boston kind of, from my perspective, accelerated that growth into getting into a bigger city, more public transit, more businesses, more things going on. And then once, COVID hit, everything just shut down. And we're seeing, at least I'm seeing here, is a lot of those, as you alluded to, mom and pop stores, mom and pop restaurants, small businesses are just shutting down. And
right. Which sucks.
And I saw on the news here yesterday is a lot of the restaurants, even, they have their summer business and now they're just deciding on their own, we're putting it on hold until the spring. They're not even trying, but then there's these bigger businesses, as you alluded to, that can afford to kind of wait this out. Right. And kind of,
so I pulled up a stat here from October 2nd. The New York City Comptroller has estimated that 50% of all restaurants in New York City are going to close permanently due to COVID-19.
I believe it.
So far, it's about 12,000 businesses closed, which equals to 129,000 jobs, and likely 10 million plus of vacant retail. Crazy.
And
so I guess you bring up a good point, right? Like I'm trying to see the positive in this, right? And that we kind of have like a forest floor that burns, right? Like it makes room for all the new trees. And I think it's going to be really hard for big cities in New York, San Francisco, for probably the next 1 to 2 to 3 years. But I do think, they're not dead by any stretch. There was a post in the New York Post by James Altucher that Jerry Seinfeld responded to that claims New York is dead. And I don't think it's dead. It's never going to die, at least not in our lifetime. There's too much gravity and gravitas around what New York City is.
New York has too much resilience.
Well, go ahead.
I say from its infrastructure alone and with the people. I have some family that lives in New York, and one thing that I was talking with one of them, and they said New York's not a city; it's a machine. And I thought that was a really good analogy of compared to other cities, it just goes and it's nonstop. And as big as COVID is, I don't think that it can stop something like New York and the bigger cities. It might slow it down, but I think that through it all, it'll pick back up and get to where it was.
Yeah, I think it's going to pick back up. It's going to be a hard 1 to 2, maybe 3 years. And then I think it's going to pick back up, and it's going to be amazing for the young people that move there. Mm-hmm. And, it's going to do another decade of growth. And so, I think there's some real concerns about the amount of people that have left. I think I heard there's 10,000 plus vacant apartments in New York because everyone kind of escaped the city over the summer. What that means for tax income, the city takes 4% on income tax on top of the state. So what that means for income to then pay school teachers and firefighters and all this stuff. And so maintaining the subway, and it's a real, I don't know. That's going to be hard. That's going to be one of the hardest parts, I think.
I think you shared an article on Twitter from the New York Times about tech moving into New York. With Google, Facebook, Amazon are now coming in within the last few years of bringing in all these businesses. But I think as much as people are leaving, and maybe it's those older age millennials that are leaving the big city after being there for 10 years like yourself, but we're going to have a new wave of infusion. There's young people, college graduates that are going to be looking for these jobs at Google, at Facebook, and I think that will eventually, as you said, in the next 2-3 years, we'll get that influx back into the city. And it's not just New York City, it's other major cities. It's Chicago, it's San Francisco, it's LA. It's, this isn't going to last forever. And I think that it's not necessarily these cities are dying. I think it's more they're just kind of they're just changing over.
Well, right. And I think COVID has made that hyper precedent, right? Because you moved to New York, you paid, ungodly amounts in rent, and you did that for the opportunity, right? Whether that was the opportunity of your job, or going to a Broadway show, or eating out at dinner, or running around Prospect or Central Park, and a lot of those opportunities have kind of just been stripped away when you're stuck in your apartment for month after month, and I don't know, but I do think that this like kind of great migration we're having, right, as a country, as a world, it's going to be really good for the rest of the country. I think you're going to get the second and third tier cities that these people are maybe leaving San Francisco, New York, and LA, and going back to I guess Chicago's in that class, Boston's in that class, but going to a St. Louis or a Portland or any of these other, exactly,
the middle-sized cities.
It's going to be really good for those cities because it's all that talent, all that intelligence, all that experience from years of those jobs are going to go there, and they're going to hopefully kickstart and rejuvenate those economies in a way that those economies have kind of been waiting, right? We talk about how some of these cities have been in a renaissance. I think that's just the start of that for them, I think.
And do you think with those cities getting more of a renaissance and an uptick from getting more influx from the larger cities are going through their own renaissance, as we alluded to earlier? And what do you think that means for them going forward as to what type of renaissance they will have?
The big cities or the small cities?
The big cities. Like, where do you see
the big cities are going to have 2 to 3 years of hard trouble, mostly probably from tax dollars not being there to support infrastructure, and the subway already needs a ton of help, and in New York, and so the big cities, I think they'll be fine. They'll get by. It'll be hard for a bit, but then they'll go back to being the machines that they are, right? And the thing when you become the machine, to your family's point, is like, it's just there's so much going on that you don't even look at the city or downtown and quantify it as like, oh, it's a renaissance, or is that, like, there's so much shit you can't keep track of it, right? There's too many industries, there's too many companies, blowing up, billion-dollar, valuations, and it's a machine. You just step into the behemoth and it's there. The energy is there. And I think with these second and third tier cities, you can pretty much quantify on two hands, what is the hottest thing going on, what industries are popular there. And I think when they cross into this point of like no turning back, where they just kind of do a lot of everything, and I think that's where they have the opportunity to go. Again, that also comes just down to pure numbers too, like population sizes. But that's my hope. That's what I think will happen. I could be wrong.
What do you think the bigger cities will look like from an infrastructure, as you kind of alluded to before, of like commercial real estate, of infrastructure of subways? Are these cities going to look different from like a physical standpoint? You know what I mean? Like, how does it adapt? How does it change to the new times?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Unfortunately, my fear is that New York ends up how it was in the 1970s, where it's just like, kind of run down and needs a lot of sprucing up and help. And I don't know that it'll be that bad, right? But like, in the last 5 years, New York City added, I think, a few thousand miles of parking protected bike lanes, right? Like, is that in the budget?
Yeah.
For the next 2 to 3 years to keep doing, bike lane expansion? Like, I don't know. And so the improvements and the beautifications of the city, I don't know what happens there. I have friends that are telling me things are a little bit run down right now, but that also could just be because everyone's locked inside still. Right. I'm not sure. What do you think happens?
I don't know. I think people have an ingenious way of adapting, and people figure out and solve these problems. What that looks like, I'm with you. I don't know. I could see, businesses changing and adapting to, this new we'll get into it later, of like this new work from home. Are there more, bike lanes for people for transportation? Are there more outdoor workspaces? Are offices more open layout? Kind of how does that look? Just restaurants, are restaurants more open space versus those, packed in intimate experiences? I think that's kind of adapting, but I think people and businesses will figure that out and get an idea of what people's needs are. And, that's kind of the basis of businesses, finding people's needs and fulfilling those needs. So I think
you bring up a good point there with just like, the reason New York got hit so hard is, in my mind, just one thing and one thing alone, and that's density.
100%.
Right? Like,
Yep.
In other places you can walk down the street and not see anyone, or, I went to the grocery store back in, March or April or whatever, and, in the midst of the pandemic, and I probably passed 100 people just going to the grocery store on a 10-minute walk.
Mm-hmm.
Any of those people could have COVID and spread it and, touched a railing or whatever. And so, but you go out to the suburbs and you're in a car and, you can choose where you go and you can see, 4 people in a week. And so, it's just pure density. And so I that's a good point though. I do think a lot of restaurants, the smart restaurants, will find ways to change their business models, change, their overhead, and adapt to probably a more spread out thing. I've seen a lot of restaurants put tents outside New York City. They're in the streets. I think the ones that cut bait now and just start doing stuff for this like kind of new normal are the ones that'll probably succeed, right? Like I've heard a few restaurants have just straight up closed, but they're like not closed permanently. They're closed to renovate because they're just going to reopen under this like new normal and this new circumstance, and they're trying to invest in the long haul right out of the gate because they've just accepted this is the future. Yeah,
they're adapting. They're figuring out ways that people's experiences that they wanted before aren't going to be what they want in the future. And the days of going into an intimate restaurant where there's people an arm's length to your right and to your left, that's not going to work. Our people that are typically going out 1 to 2 nights a week for dinner now are ordering from home, or they're ordering on Grubhub, or they're getting delivery. So do businesses adapt more and, change their business model for more takeout or more, different experiences? And I think, like, as you said, the businesses that figure that out sooner rather than later and are more at the forefront of making those changes, I think are going to have a higher success rate of, being around in 10, 15 years.
Yeah. And so, I'm good to wrap on this topic, but I just want to end with like, it's all happening all at once, which is like annoying because it's like, it's hard to keep track of, but there's a lot of restaurants closing. The people aren't in the cities, but at the same time, to your point of the Bloomberg article the other day, or the New York Times article, right? Manhattan emptied out during the pandemic, but big tech moved in. Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google have almost doubled their number of jobs in the city during this time, and so it's all happening all at once. Good and bad, and that's New York, man. It's just like can't keep track of it all. There's stuff going up, stuff going down, and it's true. That's New York.
The Big Apple.
So this is so that kind of lays a good foundation for our next topic, which you wanted to bring to the table. What are we talking about next, Tim?
The rise of the remote work as we adapt into this ever-changing COVID and adhering to protocols. It has really led to obviously people working from home. And there's pros and cons to that. As someone who has never worked from home before this was a new experience for me. And you're the opposite. You've always worked from home. So I think it's kind of
I have since 2015.
This when kind of COVID and the lockdown occurred, a lot of people were kind of like, okay, I have to work from home now. And I think there were challenges that came up along the way that people didn't really anticipate. I think at first it was like, okay, cool, like I can work from home. I think everybody thinks working from home was one thing, and then when they kind of get into it a month or two into, they're like, oh, okay, this isn't at all what I expected. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I took over the Founder Institute role in 2015, and I was the only person in New York, and the rest of the team was based in California in Palo Alto, and I worked from home a lot, and it's just different. You have to be really diligent about your time and how you carve it out, and it's not easy. It's just different. It's like apples to oranges, working in an office versus working at home. And you have to have a setup and a routine. And I think when COVID hit, I transitioned pretty nicely. And there was a lot of other things going on. Like I had COVID, I had a kid, and starting a company. But I think overall, I adapted fine. And in some ways, I think I almost prefer it at this point. And so, with Finta, we've completely, we had an office last year. We're completely transitioned to remote, and I think things are working better than ever. And I think making remote work is work. It's not easy, but it's totally doable, and I think it could be the future. So, yeah, we're working from home is hard.
It's definitely been adapting.
What did you think was going to be? What did you think it was going to be, and then what shocked you when you were like, "Oh, this is work from home"?
I think for me, it was always like, it was you go into the office or you go into work, and it's like it's the 9 to 5, sit in the chair, right? And right. I always, felt like I could better manage my time if I was working from home, you know what I mean? And kind of create your own schedule and just be more productive, which I do still think is the case. I think people can manage their own time and, get their work done just as well, whether they're sitting at their desk chair or, sitting in an office. For me, I think the biggest kind of transition, and Jeff Wald actually touched on it, and I made a note of it in the podcast, is he said when he left his job, and he said, if he was at an office, he would have been packing up his stuff into a box, walking out, saying goodbye to people, crying. Whereas working from home, he closed one laptop, went to bed, woke up the next morning, and just opened up a different laptop, and it's kind of that fine line between work life and home life is a little bit blurred. And it's that separation that I think needs to be balanced. And I think that is something that people have to learn that didn't anticipate maybe from the start of what that meant working from home.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the hardest parts of it, is balancing work life and family life. Because it's like you could still be going on work, jamming hard at, Friday at, 8, 9 o'clock, right? But if you have a significant other, is that probably what you should be doing? You have to, I think it's the routines that we've built for normal work make it really easy to just kind of have these mental spaces separated, right? So I can go, hard at work until 6, then I come home, and just by virtue of changing the environment, your whole mentality changes, the things you think about.
Even the commute, the commute from home is kind of that divider of
the wind down
of, okay, get all of my work stuff out of my head, think what I have to do for the evening or for the weekend, and kind of it's that shift. Whereas I feel like that home, you kind of have to take that time to be like, okay, I'm out of work mode. I need to get into personal mode.
Yeah, and it's hard to do it, and you basically end up with a mind where it's everything all the time, just like New York, where it's really hard to separate and compartmentalize things. And so, I ended up, my answer to remote work was I just became sort of a productivity junkie. I even taught a class on it 2 or 3 years ago on Skillshare called the Productivity Today. And it's, you just got to have lots of rules and processes. And you also then need to understand that a lot of times those rules and processes are going to get broken and maybe not always work ideally. And you have to be okay with that and kind of forgive yourself and realize that the goal of perfection is what matters. Not that it's ever going to be perfect, right? If I put workout on my calendar every day at 8 a.m., it doesn't maybe mean I'm going to work out every day at 8 a.m. Or I put like coding class or, guitar lessons or, whatever things on there that are recurring that you're trying to compartmentalize this time. You might not always stick to it. You might need to take email then or take a meeting then but it's the goal of trying to build a routine and compartmentalizing the times of your day that I found really help with remote work.
That's definitely helped me. And that's kind of when I started, those first couple weeks / months was exactly what you said is, you plan out your week, you plan out, before you go to bed, you plan out your next day. And you have to be flexible because like you said, it's that striving of perfection that, hey, if I had this task down for this time slot, if I don't get to it because something else comes up, just move it to the next day or figure out a time and allow yourself that grace period of it's not going to be perfect every single day. But as long as you're working towards those goals and, that productivity, I think you're going to be all right. And just managing that and maintaining that is really what the goal is.
Yeah. And so to switch it up a little bit and take it away from the day-to-day of the person doing the work, right? And moving it more towards the companies. What does this mean for companies? I think this very quickly means like, you used to go into an office, sit at a desk, you had a manager, that manager would, be your watch over you or whatever. And I think this quickly separates who the shit managers are that just like watched for warm bodies in a chair and those managers that actually take a vested interest in the lives of the people below them and really want to see them succeed and learn and grow as individuals. And I think this brings that to the forefront. And I think what I've seen is a lot of the people that are the shit managers like, oh, I just can't wait to get back in the office. It's like, yeah, because you need that crutch. You need the crutch of the office. That's not everyone. That's a generalization, but
I think you're right. I think the managers who can't manage or manage properly are struggling, because their staff or their team is spread out and it's a lot more difficult to manage, 8, 10, 12 people or however big your team is when you're having to do Zoom meetings and Slack and all this stuff versus having everybody all in one room and you can just crack the whip in 10 seconds. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And what it really means to be a good manager of a remote team is like 100% comes down to trust, right? Mm-hmm. You need to have the right people on the team in order to have that trust, right? So you need to have people who are self-driven, they're doers, you don't have to watch over them because why would you ever have to do that, right? They want to see the success as much as you want to see the success. And so they just get stuff done and the time clock is not even in their head. It's not even relevant. It's just about the results and the quality of the work being done.
Productivity.
Yeah.
And I think one other pro of this rise of remote for both the company and employees is the talent that can be brought into a company regardless of location. It's people that are looking for jobs in a certain field. Like, hey, if I find a job, kind of going back to our earlier conversation, that somebody's living in a smaller city, but can work at a bigger company that's located in a major city, they're not limited to what's in their physical vicinity. And on the other side, companies are able to hire talent that might be located in a different city, but they're able to bring in the best people possible. Now that these infrastructures are in place that weren't here, 8, 10 months ago to be able to do that, a year ago, a company in New York wouldn't even think about hiring somebody in another city because they weren't able to do that, but they can do that now. And I think that's really cool. That's kind of come about with this whole rise of remote.
Yeah, and I think like that's going to lead also to a lot of people wanting to live in these second and third tier cities where they can, not pay $80 for a bag of groceries at Whole Foods in Brooklyn. Not speaking from experience. A single bag of groceries, and it's going to be good for those cities. And a lot of these companies are realizing that this thing that they were afraid of, right? Because we need every warm bodies in the chairs, actually isn't that bad, and actually can be better. And so we've seen Twitter is committed to letting everyone work remote wherever they want. Facebook's approach, because of course Facebook would do this, was like, yeah, you could do that too, but like if you move out of Menlo Park in California, we're going to dock your pay, so we'll adjust your pay to be whatever the people in that city make, because they can't just ever take care of people or be nice. Dropbox, Microsoft, Google, they've everyone's following suit. And so what does that mean for these companies? It means these companies that were already global companies are going to grow even faster, because now they're not inhibited by the lack of space.
Yes and no. I agree, but I also think that it doesn't necessarily have to be the bigger companies. I think it's going to be the companies that adapt are going to be the ones who grow, because that's what employees are looking for. Is they want that work-life balance of, hey, if I want to, take a day where I work from home because my kids have a half day from school, and to have that, that's a perk. And that is something that is...
Here's a question to you. Do you think that the traditional 5-day work week is dead?
Yes.
I agree. I think you're going to see a lot of people going into the office isn't dead either. A lot of people are going to go into the office 1, 2, 3 days a week. And then, right, if you go
into the office when you need to go into the office.
Exactly.
And your employer can trust you to get the work done that needs to get done. It doesn't mean you have to be sitting in a chair 10 feet from me. I trust that you can do that because, as we talked to earlier, good managers trust their employees. And if I trust you to get the work done and you get it done, what difference does it make where you are? Whether you're at home, whether you're in the office, whether you're in the park, whether you're in a cafe, it doesn't matter. But that said, that trust goes two ways in that the employer has to trust that the employee was like, hey, we got a pretty busy week. I need you to come in, a couple days this week, or we have an important meeting. I would really like everybody to come in so we can discuss this as a group and get a lot done. Then I think the employees have to be like, hey, that's fine. And I think that this 5-day workday has now evolved to this hybrid of this balance between employer and employee. And I think the companies that don't adapt are going to get lost behind, because if you have 2 jobs, if you're applying to 2 jobs or you're looking at 2 companies to work for, and one of them has this hybrid flexible schedule that you can work towards, or one of them is, hey, our office hours are Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. What one's going to look more appealing? And I think people, are willing to have that flexibility and even maybe take a little less money if that means that they can have
the new killer perk, like health insurance or...
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting. Yeah, all right. I agree. I mean, yeah, I agree with that. All right. Well, I think we've had 2 great conversations here today. Before I wrap, I think we should end. Shout out to the companies that did this 5 years ago. Right?
Yeah, right. They were ahead of the curve.
WordPress, which makes most of the websites on the internet. I think they make like 20% of all the websites on the internet. They went fully remote like early 2010s, and everyone looked at them like they were crazy. They even got rid of the office, and everyone's like, WordPress is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Not true. They just were way ahead of the curve here. Zapier is another fully remote company. Doist, like there's some great companies out there that have been pioneering this. And if you're interested in learning more, I think Zapier has a guide to remote work that they published for free that you can Google and check out. All right, Tim, anything else to add to the pod, to the news?
I'm good. I thought that was a great conversation, and we covered a lot of ground, and That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, if you have ideas or something you want us to talk about in the next episode, you can text it to me at 646-907-6669. Send us what you want us to cover, and me and Tim will cover it on the next one. And then lastly, the show notes, everything we talked about will be up on the website, siskar.co. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Stay curious, and we'll see you on the next episode of Ambition Today.
Thanks for listening to Ambition Today. Be sure to visit siskar.co to get all the information from this episode and more great content. Until next time, stay curious, everyone.